Welcome to the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board interview for Seminole County Supervisor of Elections. Today, we have both candidates with us, and who is not with us is the current supervisor, Chris Anderson, who lost in the Republican primary to Seminole County School Board member and certified fraud examiner, Amy Pennock. In November, she will face Democrat Deborah Poulalion, who also has a background in auditing and ran against Anderson in 2020. So already we see a lot of common ground. Before we started the interview, we ran through our basic guidelines for these interviews, which are that we ask for no personal attacks and to address their answers to the board and observe a time limit of about 2 minutes per question per slide. And then both of our candidates agreed with this, and we have a feeling that given the experience with both of these candidates, that this is going to be a pretty impressive debate to watch, or discussion to watch. So I am going to dive right in with our first question. During my intro, I noted that one of you is a Republican, Ms. Poulalion is a Democrat, but do you think that the supervisor's office should be partisan? And Ms. Pennock, I'll start with you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. I don't think that this should be partisan, and I think that this role, the school board role, the sheriff role, tax collector, really should remain nonpartisan, because we need to serve all community members, all voters. We need to not focus on the certain party that we may be affiliated with, but I think my record sitting on the school board for the last 6 years in a nonpartisan role has given me insight on what it takes to run a nonpartisan office, and have argued even with state and local representatives that I agree that it should stay nonpartisan, which when I think that applies to the Supervisor of Elections office as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Poulalion, same question.
Hi, thank you. So, that's a question that people will ask you a lot when you're out on the campaign trail. They'll go, "Oh, I thought this was nonpartisan." I'll say, "No, it's going to say a party affiliation on your ballot." And I do think we all agree that we wish it were nonpartisan, but the state has made it clear it's going to stay that way. There were even a couple counties in their charter that they tried to make the constitutional offices nonpartisan, and the state has denied that. Polk County is an example. So we're going to have to live with it. So one of the things that I'm really committed to is making sure that, because it is going to stay partisan, that in every other possible way, you stay neutral, objective, and sort of separate from the candidates. I hesitate about the idea of endorsements in a supervisor of elections office, either direction. I just think that compromises the objectivity. So that's something that I plan to avoid. I also think it's important for the supervisor of elections to reach out equally to both parties, perhaps even engage them together in some informational meetings, just to show that there's no favoritism on either side, because sometimes that idea comes in people's heads just because they have no evidence to refute it. So I think there's a lot that can be done to demonstrate being neutral and nonpartisan in this role. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wanted to shift to a trend that I think disturbs all of us, and that's that many voters, Republicans, Democrats, non-party affiliates, have expressed fear that this election will be subject to tampering attempts. Obviously, neither of you is going to have a chance to impact what happens in 2024, because you won't take office until after this year's race is over. But what steps do you see as necessary to calm those fears? And we will start with
So fears of tampering. I mean, I think one really simple thing to remind people of is that you can't hack paper. So it is wonderful that the state of Florida, every ballot that's cast, there is a paper backup. And if necessary, we can go to it to validate the electronic tabulation. I think another thing that people need to know is that never are the communication lines connected to the internet. So there's already a firewall to prevent that kind of tampering. In the state of Florida, actually, unlike other states, does extra levels of validation for the tabulation equipment they use. So we've got another layer there. They follow NIST guidelines for their cybersecurity, which actually, as a supervisor of elections, it's not that exciting to talk about, but I think one of the most important things is to make sure that the election office has the best technology and also enough people who know how to handle technology, that there's a bit of redundancy there, that we don't just rely on one person. Because with my background working at the Institute of Internal Auditors, although I want to make clear, I am not an internal auditor. I do research in this profession. I know a lot about it, but I am not an internal auditor. However, there's always the idea of your risk and your controls to make sure that that risk, you avoid having that risk happen. And cybersecurity is a pain point everywhere, public sector, private sector, large and small organizations. So the supervisor of elections really has to pay attention to that and follow all the guidelines from the state and make sure they have the staff on hand to be able to catch any issues that might come up. And we need communication to the public that we're doing all these things because that's where the confidence will come from. Thank you.
Oh, great question. There's a lot of misinformation out there that the community has kind of latched onto because there's a lack of communication from elections offices on processes, on how they do cybersecurity awareness training and protection in the offices. And so that's really something that I'm going to work on in the first 30, 60 days is create a really robust communication plan to make sure that we are rebuilding the trust in the supervisor of elections office. I think when you have a trustworthy person at the helm who communicates consistently and communicates well, you lose some of that misinformation or some of that distrust out there, and people will feel a little bit better about elections. One of the things that I do want to do once I'm in office is implement Clear Ballot. We are the only county in Seminole or in the surrounding area that does not have Clear Ballot, that allows 100% audit post-election of the ballots. Right now, the state statutes only mandate that you audit one precinct and one race. And in the accounting world, in the audit world, that wouldn't even meet GAAP compliance. So I don't feel that it even meets election audit compliance. And so that's, this is all what we would do once we're in the office. Unfortunately, the incumbent not being in the office for the rest of the year has posed a challenge, but the staff there don't want to get it wrong. And they're working really, really hard to make sure they're meeting deadlines, they're meeting compliance, they're communicating out as much as possible. So we have to rely on the great staff that are there. And I plan on rebuilding the staff, rebuilding communication trust, and implementing Clear Ballot.
Thank you for that. You, Ms. Pennock, you touched on this quite a bit, but it shifted into the next question that we had listed. I think both of you have agreed that the supervisor's office has taken some hits to its reputation over the past 6 years. What other measures should be taken to make it clear to voters that the office is being run professionally and with accountability? And I know, Ms. Pennock, you've sort of touched on that, but if you can expound on it, and Ms. Poulalion, we'll go to you after that.
Again, it goes back to the trust of the person in the office and accessibility. I've heard a lot of complaints that people will go to the office to speak to Chris or to provide him information or concerns, and he's not available. And as an elected official, I've been elected. That's my obligation to listen to you. And so I think we have a lot of work to do in that office. I would like to meet with all the municipalities, all the county officials that are engaged in the election process to make sure we are addressing their concerns, have a plan to address their concerns, and then we really start rebuilding the team and rebuilding the office and the trust locally. It's going to take a lot of boots on the ground effort to go out and talk to a lot of people, be available, have town halls, bring in, I've talked about want to have an ambassador program where we talk about the successes and maybe even some of the challenges we have and what we're doing to fix those challenges, who will also help go out into the community, into the county, the schools, the churches, the community groups, and talk about what this office is doing to really rebuild the trust. Human nature, we're going to make mistakes, but you have to own it and you have to get in front of it. And that's where I think there has been a lot of mishaps in the current office, and something that I would like to implement once I'm in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Poulalion, same question.
So we're talking about restoring trust in the office and how to reach out to the public. One thing I want to talk about in terms of making the office more effective in trust, building that trust, is building a partnership with the county commission. I think it's extraordinarily important that we approach election voting services as what we, the county, can do to make it the best possible services for our voters. And we've really lagged behind for a long time because it's felt a little bit like it's not a partnership. And it needs to be a partnership with the county commission, and they need to agree that our voters need the best possible services. So Clear Ballot is a really good example. There's an expense involved there, and the county commission has to approve it. And I agree that having that extra audit service would be very good for improving trust. Another area that would require a partnership with the county commission is having prepaid postage for the mail ballots. Orange County has it, Volusia has it, Lake has it, Osceola has it. We don't. And that is a service to voters that is extremely meaningful, and I think would be a good way to get off to a fresh start and show that there's been changes at the Supervisor of Elections office and that the focus is on voter services. I also want to make sure that when we provide information, I really like it to be in a way that's accessible to everybody anytime. And that means that website, which hasn't been updated, I'm going to say more than a decade. I go to other counties to get information because I don't know where to find it anymore for our own county. So I think that is like the first triage point, is getting information there that everybody can find. So appreciate the question. Thank you.
You both mentioned Clear Ballot. Are you satisfied that the technology Seminole uses to tabulate votes is up to date, accurate, and secure? And which upgrades would you recommend, if there are any besides Clear Ballot? And we'll start with Ms. Poulalion.
Thank you. Well, Seminole County uses ES&S, one of the two approved tabulation systems, and I am satisfied that if we are following state requirements, we should not do anything beyond that. So I'm comfortable there. I agree with implementing Clear Ballot as the backup audit. And I think staffing, as I mentioned before, is extremely important. You can get all the technology in the world, but if you don't have the right people on staff to manage it, it's not going to be effective. So I think we've touched on it before. But staffing, you need to have people there with the right expertise, and create a work environment where they want to stay for a long time. So we have that continuity. So that's extremely important. And I did want to mention, some of my background. So I have a master's degree in mass communication with an emphasis in public opinion research, which was survey research. And what I do full time for my job right now is I develop public opinion surveys. I send it out to people, make sure they're clear, get them to answer this survey, kind of like running an election. You get your questions, you send them out to people, you make sure they're clear, you get the answers back, you tabulate them, and you make reports. This is what I do all day. I've been doing it for 10 years. I actually work with business leaders all over the world on these kinds of projects. I do a lot of translations. I deal across cultures. So the fit for me to transition into a supervisor of elections role, it's the same processes, it's a different office, and it's an area I really care about deeply, personally and professionally, and I would look forward to applying my skills there.
Thank you. Ms. Pennock?
Thank you for the question. Technology is tricky, and as we move into new eras, it's something that we're always going to be challenged with. I have sat in logic and accuracy testing for the past 3 elections and watched the process where we test the machines to make sure they're functioning accurately. And it's a great process. I wish more people would come and observe. ENS is the equipment that we have, and it's updated regularly. The vendor comes in, they update it, they make sure it's got all the updates, everything it needs to make sure it's secure. So I do think we have the best technology in Seminole County. Not all counties in the state of Florida use ENS. Some still use Dominion, and ENS is the preferred. I think with the statutes and the policies in place, Florida and Seminole County will be the best elections, best secure elections. Because we're not in there, we can't say for 100% sure that we are comfortable with the technology, but from what I have seen, I am comfortable with what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from the staff that I talk to, or the former staff that I talk to that use those equipment. As a forensic accountant, I study fraud all day long. I study IT. I study what to look for when things go wrong. I study red flags. And so I think it's really important to have that skill set in there to understand where equipment could go wrong, where functions of equipment could go wrong, where upgrades or equipment failures can impact the election. And so I look forward to really taking my skills in there to make sure I can also validate that these equipment are secure, and then communicate that out into the communities.
Thank you. So every supervisor struggles with the task of building a massive workforce of poll workers before each election, making sure that everyone is trained in any new laws and behaves in a way that avoids legal challenges. How would you improve on the current system of managing poll workers? And we'll start with Ms. Pennock.
Okay. I've talked to a lot of poll workers who haven't poll worked in the last couple of years because they either haven't gotten the call to, or someone hasn't reached out to them. And so I think we have a really rich opportunity to get some former poll workers back in there. I also think we have a really rich opportunity to engage maybe college students who are interested in the civics process. There's different ways that I think we can engage churches and other civics organizations that want to be involved in the process. And having run businesses, having run HR, IT, finance in nonprofits and other organizations, I think my skill really helps to be able to understand onboarding, training, retention, and what it takes to bring those volunteers in, the poll workers in, and keep them engaged in the process, keep them happy, listening to them. I understand the Supervisor of Elections Office just this past season implemented poll worker surveys. That's a really good pulse on your human resources. Are they happy? What are they struggling with? What is the feedback that you're getting? Did you know that there was a challenge with this person here or that person there? And it allows you to address it so that you keep those poll workers happy, you keep your volunteers engaged, you keep them wanting to come back more and more. And so I really look forward to bringing those skills in there to reach out to our community. Again, created an ambassador program, which is probably going to involve some of the poll watchers and the poll workers, and rebuild that pool of people. I've had numerous people come and say, I stopped working and I can't wait till you're in there so that I can come back and volunteer. So please keep in touch.
Thank you. Same question, Ms. Poulalion.
Thank you. So absolutely, recruiting workers for the polls, as you said, is an ongoing challenge, and especially because we have a lot of wonderful people who are aging out. And so I think it's really important to start recruiting younger people so that our veteran poll workers can mentor them, get them up to speed. You know, we have training manuals, but then there's the things that you just learn when you're there and watching somebody who knows how to handle the situations. So one of the things that I would like to have a lot more transparency about is the Adopt a Precinct program, because it's such a great way to get poll workers and build teams that stay together year after year. So Adopt a Precinct means that you would have a group, a Rotary Club, maybe even a neighborhood organization that says, we're going to run the poll. We'll be the poll workers. We'll supply the poll workers, and any of those payments won't go to the individuals. They will go to the group. This is a great program. You can't find anything about it on the website. Forget it. It's not there. So, people who don't know. And so we're losing opportunities because we just don't have transparency about even being a poll worker. In fact, I had somebody ask me, she's like, I really want to be a poll worker. I said, that's great. I'll send you the link from the website. I couldn't find it. I had to sit down, look through the FAQs that scroll on for about 7 pages, hoping that maybe that's where it was. So I also think we need to recruit more poll workers who speak Spanish, and we need to have a lot more transparency about information in Spanish at those polling places, and that there is somebody there that can help you. Spanish is a designated minority language in Seminole County, and we should proudly and conspicuously serve all our voters in English and in Spanish, including recruiting our poll workers. That is mainly what I want to say. Thank you.
You guys are doing a great job of hearing our questions before we ask them. So it's interesting. And I actually did want to just go ahead and make sure that I get both of you on record on a couple things where Ms. Poulalion spoke about the need to pay postage on ballots this year. It's going to take 2 stamps because the ballot is so heavy. And so I would like to start with and then when you talked about that, I would also like both of you to address the current situation with alternate languages and making sure that voters who are eligible to cast a ballot have information available to them in a language that they are most comfortable using. And we'll start with Ms. Poulalion on that, since you've already kind of given some of your insight on that, and then we'll give Ms. Pennock a chance to answer.
Thank you. So I heard some context and background information. What is the main question you want me to focus on?
Actually, it's a kind of a 2-parted question. Okay. First, a little bit more about how about making sure that voters can return those ballots, including any other barriers you see, like the way that the envelope is currently structured. And though I know a lot of that is set by state law. And then also the question of access in different languages, and Mr. Anderson definitely came under some criticism for that.
Great. Okay, thank you. Yes, so I ran for supervisor of elections. I filed in 2019, ran against Mr. Anderson. It was one of the first things I pointed out was getting the prepaid postage for the mail ballots. And yes, it is a barrier. There's no security advantage to making someone put their own stamp on it. I think we talk a lot about things you don't want to do because of security. There's no security issue here. Those stamps are really important for people who are disabled or elderly or just a college student who may not have easy transportation and go figure out how to get a stamp. So that's something, again, that cooperation with the county to say, hey, it's a partnership here. We want to have the best possible service for our voters. We don't want to keep lagging behind the counties around us. And that $1 postage, if there is no state law against it, I think it would be a bit of decency to just describe, hey, You can do it with 2 first-class stamps. You can do it with a first-class stamp and an extra ounce stamp. Technically, I think you could do it with 2 postcard stamps. Like, there's a lot of ways to get $1.01, but it is really hard on people to be faced with that odd number and they don't know what to do with it. So then the second part about Spanish. So I have met with the Supervisor of Elections office in person multiple times talking about access to information in Spanish. And it's interesting, even now, if you look at your ballot, the Spanish font is smaller than the English font. And there's no reason for that. I actually looked at my mother's ballot from Lee County. They are exactly the same size, English and Spanish. And I think it's just a carryover of not recognizing that English and Spanish are equal access in Seminole County. And I think we need to get that covered. And we can start looking at other languages. I know the website, it's fairly easy to go ahead and get a Google Translate for more than just English. So that can be handled. But I think we really need to make sure first that we've covered our required mandatory language appropriately, including the phone service. So for a very long time, you had to wait 30 seconds before you could hear the option for Spanish. That honestly changed in the last week, and I was extraordinarily relieved about that. But the fact that it took 5 years really makes me angry. So we have work to do.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Seminole,
Pennock. Same question. And I
Thank
can
you.
refine.
Thank you.
If you want.
Seminole County is a Section 203 county, meaning we have enough Hispanic voters in our population that requires us to have the dual language ballot. And it also requires us to have an interpreter or a Hispanic speaking person at every single poll location. So we meet that obligation currently. Definitely could do a little bit better. We could do a heck of a lot better in having more of the Hispanic population engaged. And that's going to take voter outreach. That's going to take someone in that to get out in that community and help them understand the power of their vote and have them get into the office and get into the process and assist us with voting. There right now, and again, we were the last county to implement ballot on demand printing. What I would like to, and we only use it for early voting. We don't use it for day of. What it allows us to do is create your ballot when you walk in. It's not pre-printed. And so if there's a matching software out there that would allow us to integrate different languages, I think we need to explore that so that we can print a ballot in Creole. If we have a person that comes in that's mainly Creole speaking with very little English, let's remove that barrier for them to vote. And so I really want to look and make sure that we have all the access to technology that would allow us to make sure we can have the different languages available to people at all of our polling locations, early voting, day of voting, and even for vote by mail. I think that we do definitely need to look at making sure that it's we're not being discriminatory in how we are presenting the ballot. When it comes to prepaid postage, I'm a little bit different. I think that we need to have the voters have skin in the game. And when they don't have that prepaid postage, my theory is, you know, they're going to put, if they really want to get to the poll, they're going to get to the poll. A stamp isn't going to make them get there or not. And currently, if you do mail your ballot in and it does not have enough postage or it does not have postage, it gets delivered and the Supervisor of Elections office does pay for that postage. So currently we address that issue. It's just not widely used because that's a real big cost barrier.
Thank you, guys. And I wanted to switch to a question that has been something that we've seen for the supervisors kind of walk arms and stand together on, which is that on numerous or multiple occasions in the past, the legislature has passed laws that would tighten the ability of people to register or to stay registered, and in many cases, there have been attempts to quote unquote purge the voter rolls. And of people who are believed to be ineligible to cast ballots or who have been inactive for a long time. But supervisors have really kind of stood up and said, we're not going to be removing voters who we believe to be qualified. And I would like for both of you to describe how you feel your office would approach this issue. And we'll start with Ms. Pennock.
Thank you. You know, when you take office as an elected official, you take an oath to follow the law. And Florida statute as it stands right now doesn't allow for non-citizens to vote. And I want to make sure that we keep that we are following the law. So if the law changes, I'll be happy to follow the law as it stands. It doesn't allow non-citizens to vote. There are certain processes for clearing the voter rolls. You can't just take someone off. The office does go through some thorough processes on a daily basis. Someone in the office goes and scrubs newspapers and websites for obituaries, and that allows people to take allows a supervisor of elections office to take voters off the voter rolls. I think it's important as well to address felon rights and restoration of those voting processes. I think it's extremely important if these individuals have fulfilled what they have been given post sentencing, that they get their voters' rights back. They have done their time. They have made restorations, and I think I feel strongly that we need to make sure that those people are being served and there's no barriers created to allowing them to vote again. I know that there is a statewide supervisor of election group, and that's a really great way to understand the resources, the laws, and it's a great, powerful source when you have 67 supervisor of elections saying, no, we're not going to do this because it's not right, or yes, we need to do this because the laws need to change. And that's where I'm really looking forward to joining that force to make really positive change for voters and voter access and clean voter rolls in the state of Florida and Seminole County.
Thank you. Ms. Poulalion, same question.
Thank you. So we're talking about list maintenance, and I like calling it list maintenance. It is not purging. It is an absolute necessity that people who have moved, who have registered to vote elsewhere, who have died, who have lost their eligibility due to getting a felony conviction, do not remain on the voter rolls. In addition, if after someone submits a voter registration form and it can be determined that they do not have citizenship, they cannot be allowed to stay on the voter rolls. So list maintenance has to happen. And one of the things, that I know most of the supervisors of elections in Florida were disappointed that we aren't a part of ERIC anymore, because ERIC was a system that let us know if someone registered somewhere else. This is our only way of getting that little piece of information. And it's a very important trigger for the local person to, contact that last known address and say, are you still here? Because if not, you shouldn't be on our rolls anymore. The same way they also had the death records, so you didn't have to look through the obituaries. So, that's a challenge, but I know that good staff and creativity can overcome that challenge and continue to maintain the voter rolls the way they need to be. I think people should also be aware regarding the citizenship question that when you register to vote with a driver's license or a Florida ID, that citizenship information is wrapped up in that ID. So that covers a lot of those issues. And there are a few other forms of ID that don't have that same level of information, but you can request the Secretary of State to validate the citizenship there. So, when people worry about citizenship, they should know first step is, checking it at registration. So then when it comes to voting time, what you're really checking is this person who is standing in front of me to vote the person they say they are? Or is this person who sent in the mail ballot and signed it, we know that's the person. So that's about voter rolls. Thank you.
Thank you. We've talked about several different methods of voting, but wanted to touch on early voting. Just a very quick question. Do you believe that Seminole County has enough early voting sites, and does it have enough early voting days? And we'll start with Ms. Poulalion for that.
Thank you. So one of the things I started bringing up right away when I started campaigning for supervisor elections in 2019 was that there's a big difference in Seminole County between the early voting hours you have for the primary and the early voting hours you have for the general election. For the primary, Seminole County has the minimum allowed by state law, 8 days, 8 hours a day. You can't go any lower. All the counties around us have more. Osceola and Orange County actually have almost double the hours. So we had about 64 and they had over 120 hours available in the primary. So the point is every election matters. A lot of elections are decided in the primary and we need those early voting hours. So I absolutely support expanding early voting hours, particularly for the primary. The other thing you mentioned is location. So interestingly, in Seminole County, we have, in Oviedo, 2 locations that are very close to each other. And we really, the Oviedo Library and the Oviedo Aquatic Center, there's probably a history why, but that's the way it is. We really need some locations more on the west side of the county, West Altamont. There's something called a wild card voting location for early voting, and you don't have to conform to all those special rules. Our wild card is on East Altamont Drive near Travel Country, the old Party City, right? Which is just within a mile of the Castleberry Library. So we don't get a lot of benefit from that. What I really want for our extra early voting site is Seminole State College. I want to help our young people start a lifelong habit of voting. And I want to have it at that center hub where we have so many students, so many faculty, so many staff already coming and going from that campus. We can have continuity there and really serve the community at a central location instead of going to a dead strip mall or randomly moving our wild card location around. So I'm excited about early voting opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pennock. Same question. Do you feel that we have enough early voting hours and sites?
Thank you, Jay. I have a story, real quick story to tell. I had a friend who went to try to vote early voting in the primary. He showed up 5 minutes before 9 on his way to work, and he was turned away because it wasn't early. They weren't open yet. The early voting closed while he was still at work. And so we've just created a barrier for our working individuals to vote early, and we want them to vote. We don't want to have these barriers out there. So I want to get creative. Maybe we need evening early voting hours. Maybe we need to, I do think we need to expand it. I think we need to look what's feasible within the budget, what we can work with the county commissioners to give us more space. They kindly give us all of the libraries, the municipalities give us all the libraries to work with. And it's a challenge to find locations that are willing to give you space over a certain 8 days, 12 days, and the many hours. An additional challenge is you have to have enough parking spaces that are not permit required. And so Ms. Poulalion, one of her discussion points is Seminole State. And unfortunately, it's not an option because there's so many permitted parking out there that it limits access to voters. And that's one of the things that we have to look at when we're looking at locations. A strip mall that has a lot of open parking is a great location. Not to say what our current locations are the best ones, but I think that we need to get in and look at definitely different hours, different expanding. We need to be creative with how we can get voters out. Listen, our turnout in Seminole County has been lower than our surrounding counties, and we used to have the highest turnout of all the local counties. We've got to do better about getting people into the polls. And if that means increasing early voting, that means going out and figuring out souls to the polls, or really getting people to understand the dates of elections. We've got to do a better job in that. And we need to start looking at all our options.
Thank you. We talked a bit earlier about recruiting and keeping poll workers, but I wanted to go back to poll workers for a second about their safety. What additional measures would you recommend to ensure the safety of poll workers and voters at early voting sites and on election day? And we'll start with Ms. Pennock.
Oh gosh, safety is a big issue everywhere, not just elections. I think the environment right now, the political environment right now is so challenging. And having worked on the school board, we talk about safety consistently. We just had a safety debriefing yesterday and talk about how we can use the benefits of the relationship with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, with each of the municipal police departments. I really want to make sure that we are getting the good information from the right people about what's going on in our community, what threats are out there. We're dispelling any of the misinformation that's out there that may cause concern, but then that we're also bringing in really good training resources to make sure our poll workers, our poll watchers, our voters, our staff, and the locations that we're using for poll locations all feel safe. And if that means us having an officer on site or an undercover officer on site, we're going to engage in those conversations with the relationships to make sure that we are creating and we are creating and maintaining a safe environment. Because the last thing we want to do, again, is create a barrier to voting in person. I say vote in person, be a VIP. And if you don't feel safe in doing that, we need to hear the why, but we also need to dispel it if it's misinformation that's creating that unsafe. So really creating better training to make sure we're watching for red flags for human behaviors that may cause concern, reacting to those immediately, not waiting until something big happens, and then really dispelling information that's out there.
Thank you. Ms. Poulalion, same question.
Thank you. So, I think there are a lot of small and large security crises that could happen with a voting location, just like, at a school. Let's say we have a bomb threat. What are we going to do about that? And so I think we need to have a lot of scenarios worked out, not necessarily to, cause people distress, but in the background, have some good scenario planning for things that we hope are unthinkable. And I'd also like to make sure that the clerk and the deputy at each location has sort of like this cheat sheet, right? Like if you're in a crisis, this is the number you call, and our sheriff is going to be expected to be arrived in there within, 92 seconds to take care of what's going on. So that's probably something that, these plans should stay in the background. Some may already be in place, but I would absolutely make sure that it's practiced, because it's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to say it's in the back of your manual, but it's another thing to know, exactly what you're going to do if there's a situation. So, also in terms of safety, I do want to mention that, state law says you can't have a police presence at a polling location. So you're not supposed to have a police car parked there or somebody in uniform, because it is off-putting to some voters. So if you want to have law enforcement there, they would certainly need to be plain clothes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've given people a lot to think about, and I expect a lot of confidence in the outcome of this race. We will be making an endorsement, but we also urge the people who are watching this to take a good look at those candidates. Both of you have websites. You've been very active on social media. You've attended public forums. And of course, we've had our great news coverage of this race as well. So we'd ask to just say, who do you have the most confidence in to administer elections and meet your needs as a voter here in Seminole County? And most important, I think you would both whack me if I didn't mention this, you have to remember to vote before November 5th. Are on November 5th at the polls. That's through mail balloting, early voting, or at your precinct, and on election day. And with that, as promised, I did run my little random list picker. And I would like to invite you both to make closing statements, starting with Ms. Pennock.
Wonderful. Thank you again for the opportunity to have this discussion. Amy Pennock, I'm a forensic accountant. I have 30 plus years in running businesses, financials, auditing, HR, IT, and I look forward to really getting into the office and reinstilling trust. Transparency is such a must in this office, and I'm known for that. I don't shy away from it. I don't shy away from standing on my own and making sure that we're communicating out the information that we need to know, or that the community needs to know. I do want to share some important dates that are coming up. Vote by mail ballots are happening right now. You can vote. The last day you can request a vote by mail ballot is October 24th, and early voting starts Monday. It's the 21st through the 3rd. So please get out and vote. Your vote is your asset, and who better to watch over your assets than an auditor? So please think about Amy Pennock when you go to the polls. On or before the 5th on those dates that I just talked about. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion.
All right, Ms. Poulalion, you're up.
Hi, thank you. So in closing, my name is Deborah Poulalion. I am proud to be running for Supervisor of Elections. As a professional, I work at the Institute of Internal Auditors as a senior research analyst. And as I mentioned earlier in the interview, all of the processes I manage now professionally map over to the Supervisor of Elections office, from designing surveys to communicating dates to getting the results to organizing them and reporting them out. So I am ready to serve you. I've been tracking, monitoring, and advocating for voting for years. This is nothing new for me. I have a platform with tangible changes I want to make on my website, at least 15 things. I think one of the things we've heard different between, my platform and my goals is I do believe that prepaid postage is worth the investment for the voters in Seminole County. And people need to understand that that postage is only paid on the ballots that are mailed back. So we're not putting a stamp, we're not paying for stamps that aren't being used or postage that's not being used. It is an extraordinarily small amount of money compared to the overall budget. So I think it's very important for Seminole County to have that. I also want to point out for Seminole State College, campus now is not the way it used to be for parking, and it's actually quite easy to find parking. We already have voting done at the Oviedo campus. So, it is one of my platform issues to have early voting at Seminole State College, to have that continuity for our young people, to build a culture and habit of voting, and also to make it convenient for everyone who is already on campus, already parked. Some of my additional platform issues were more early voting for the primary, including Souls to the Polls Sunday, having access to information in Spanish. I would not use the office for self-promotion. I think we've all noticed that happened a great deal. We don't need to have our names promoted. We need to promote voting through the Supervisor of Elections office. And finally, I want to consider making sure that it's a partnership with the County Commission, that we work together to have the best possible voting services for Seminole County. Thank you very much for your time.
I thank you both for joining us, and I wish you both luck